but I'm delighted to see each person in this room, and the question is asked so often, do you enjoy what you do? And each and every one of us, even this fine young lady who's running for the House of Representatives, who is here today, and many others that are in elected positions. Bob, you know the importance of public service. Public service, we all were raised into public service many years ago. And I can tell you, as citizens of South Carolina, we live under the rule of a bloated state government, which is really rigged against each and every one of us. Ms. House Member, you'll learn when you get there, it's a maze. You start virtually on the back row. We started in the Senate on the back row. And I can tell you that when we came out, Senator McConnell, who was then president, pro tem McConnell was going to become president down at the College of Charleston. We went and met with Glenn, and we decided to look to a vote with the South Carolina Senate, Republican Senate, and they elected me into the position of pro tem of the Senate, of which whenever Senator McConnell took over the presidency, he resigned, and then we were able to ascend to the lieutenant governor's position. Public service, I keep finding, is very rewarding all over this state. No matter if you're in city council, we served in the city government, served as a mayor a couple of terms, and then served as the president of a chamber of commerce. But I know this because I spent the better part of 3 decades navigating the system and working through its loopholes and burdensome regulations. I can tell you a lot of members of the press that are here today, they can share with you that it is a maze that you got to follow every minute of every day to make sure you can follow whatever piece of legislation or what part of the appropriation bill is going to be talked about today or within the next week or so. But you're talking about a state that has a AA, AAA credit rating. I can tell you we served on Senate Finance for some 12 years. It is chairman of a subcommittee. We had 26 state agencies we chaired. Some were like Park Recreation Tourism, Department of Commerce, the Port of Charleston, Port of Georgetown, a lot of agencies we chaired. And I can just tell you that it was an experience, not just handing money out, but calling them back in a year later, wanting to know how did you spend that money, what was the purpose of spending that money, why do you need new money? And of course, I've always felt like, and learned this many years ago under a governor called Carroll Campbell, that if you're in trouble financially, you cannot tax your way out of problems you're having. You won't get prosperity by opening the tax books and keep raising taxes. And you certainly can't borrow the money. Either way, taxation or borrowing simply will not solve the economic problems that you could have. And I will tell you that if you had served in local government, city government, you would know very quickly that in local government, the funds simply are not there. In state government, there's some $29 billion. In state funds, you get about $8 to $8.5 billion comes from the federal side, the federal government. You have about $8 billion that comes in from the state, and then a little bit less comes from other government dealing with fines and other type fees that come into the state appropriation. $29 billion a year, that's a lot of money. I know that we will take that experience we've had and use it to work our government in a more accountable and a more responsible way for all South Carolinians. When you hear South Carolina does not have the funding, you can't just believe that. This state is loaded with money. You don't have a AA, AAA credit rating just because you've got that because somebody's monitored that funding. And I'm happy to say that the governors of this state and lieutenant governors and as well as Senate and House members, they have looked after the purses of this state in a great way. Now, I will tell you that there are a lot of bond bills that have come along that a lot of us did not support. It was borrowing that money. But in some cases where the interest rates were so low and where you could do some brick and mortar, you tried to do it with the universities and colleges and technical colleges. But the fact remained, just going out borrowing the money, you knew that you were going to have to pay it back. But true change can only come by stripping more power and funding from state government and giving it back to the people so we can make more and better decisions locally. Together we will put South Carolina citizens back in control of our future. That is why I'm running for governor of this state, because I am of the opinion that we need a cleansing in every agency of this state. I'm of the opinion audits are very important. I'm not sure you should use the same auditor for every agency over and over and over again. Sometimes you need a fresh face, and I'm of the opinion that when those CPAs come in, that they do a great job, but still you need to change faces to make sure we're getting the best that we can for the taxpayers' money. I will just tell you this, that when we went into the aging program, I asked for a copy of the audits for the past 10 years. And they said, fine, we'll have to go back into boxes and get them. And I said, no, just go to the computer and pull them down. And they said, no, we'll have to go into these boxes, because they did it like a scratch audit every 2 years. Every 2 years, that's when they did these audits. So they brought me 10 of these audits, basically the same auditors, and I can tell you it was basically the same executive message that was given to the agency. And I talked to the Budget Control Board and asked them to send us two 35-year-old CPAs from Budget Control Board. I want to do an independent audit of that agency, of which we did. And they came back and they rated it after about 40 to 60 days. They rated it with like an A solid grade, which was great, but we needed an independent audit to let us know. We like to know about invoices and bills that are being paid. Historically, South Carolina has had several times where we've had a lot of funding invoices paid with little accountability. People don't want to talk about that, but it's true. And I can also tell you this, that now we've got aging on track, of which is doing wonderful. They graded that agency with an A grade, but I will tell you this too. I met with Chairman Leatherman, and I talked to him about these audits. I asked him who is taking care of the $29 billion a year, and he said, we have audits that take care of it. I said, sir, I just went through that in the aging program, and I found out that we needed to either change agencies with these audits, so we need to do a better deal of bidding out that process. And I can tell you that you're talking about audits, what's another way? And he said, well, we got an oversight committee. And I said, good. So I went before the oversight committee. I asked them to have aging come in and give its state report to this oversight committee in the Senate. And I can tell you when they did it, I asked a question. You know that there are 80 plus agencies in South Carolina. I said, how often will you meet with these 80 plus agencies? We'll do 8 a year. Well, 8 a year at 80 plus agencies means that the oversight committee that was studying these agencies financially, that it would take, certainly it would take closer to 10 years to go through before you'd ever see all these agencies for those audits to come out or that oversight to come out. The thing is, I'm a firm believer in AA, AAA credit rating, but I do like to know that when we auditing a lot of these agencies in the state, it is done the same way as the local governments, municipal and county and school districts, that they're having to do audits. And I share these things with you because there's no perfect system. And what I have learned in my experience is that nobody should ever condemn an audit. They should embrace it and bring it forward. And I can tell you now that we do have the AA, AAA credit rating, but we have that because we've had good people working at these agencies that have taken care of that funding and watched it very closely. But still, with that said, that CPA auditing is very important. Now, here's what I was talking about with this local control with counties and cities and school districts. Back, I think it was in '75, Roy Bates, who was city attorney of Columbia at the time, and I think it was Travis Medlock and some others, created the home rule legislation that passed in 1975. And when it passed, I was on city council in King Street, so I knew all about it. we had to choose one of the former governments. But I can tell you what was the intent of home rule was not let Columbia mandate or dictate back to the local governments. What has happened, it was passed, some things went home, but a lot never made it home. That's an issue we're going to address as a new governor the first 100 days. That we're going to look at is the home rule aspect to see what can be brought back home, to see if there's some way that we can keep more of that money at home, not just in the pockets of those that spend all that money in taxation, but also those local governments who can be watched by elected local officials as well. And so what I share with you is that beginning yearly, I think that there needs to be a people audit that will be disclosed by a Blue Ribbon People's Group that will look at it, that will look at those 80+ agencies. It doesn't cost a lot of money. We already audit and we just need to come in with a more solid, I think a more solid accounting practice that will make a big difference. Now we may have some auditors in here today, but I'll tell you, I shared the same type message all over the state, and I've not found a negativism across this state that they're willing to open the door to any procurement, any rebidding of process to make sure that the monies in South Carolina are being held accountable. This thing about the Department of Transportation being in such hard, dire strait with finances, I'm here to tell you that DOT has plenty of money. I probably would never have voted for the gas tax if I had been in the position. I commended Henry for vetoing it. By the way, Henry's a friend of mine, Catherine Templeton. We just all want to serve. Nothing wrong with that. I think that's commendable. Anybody hope that wants to run, if it's 100 people want to run for governor, they should do it. It's a good thing to know that we have citizens that are willing to participate. But with that said, I'm here to tell you that would be one of the first biggest audits that we have. We need to see what kind of bills are payable and accounts receivable. And we also need to take a look at the new projects that are going on all over this state. How do we know about the new projects? We've traveled all over this state. We've seen them. Greenville, Charleston, everywhere. At 526, no excuse that it's not under construction. That's one of the first things we'll take a look at. There's 26 out here, there's some mega improvements that have got to be made. But we've got to open up the base traffic across the state, regardless where you go into Spartanburg or Greenville, or if you go into Anderson or you go into Mount Pleasant, wherever you go. Downtown, if you go on 77 north from Columbia, anywhere you go, the traffic is starting to bottleneck now. And so what we've got to do is we can't just look at the maintenance of roads. We've got to do that. Matter of fact, years ago, I supported the maintenance of highways, trying to create an opportunity, but it just was not a fashionable thing to do. But at the time, we realized that if you let these roads tear up, you got to go back and reconstruct the whole road. I got into Senate when I was 32 years old. It was in '88. My father had been a member of the Senate. He died. And I can tell you that it cost $18,000 a mile to resurface a 2-lane road, a rural primary base 2-lane road, $18,000. Today it costs probably about $180,000. It's really expensive. And so, but the thing is, you got to maintain what you have, and if you don't, I was talking to George Dean Johnson in Spartanburg and others that are saying, look, corporate South Carolina has paid millions to South Carolina system. All we want is roads taken care of. And when it comes to economic development, Bobby Hitt will tell you and many others that what people see coming into a state, not only the condition of those roads, but the cleanliness of the state, is also important for recruiting industry in. I will also tell you that I think we need to restructure the Department of Commerce where there'll be a major focus on new jobs, not just in the bigger urban areas, but we need to hit all 46 counties to make a difference. I learned years ago, I went into a thing called Upstate Alliance up in the upper part of the state years ago. Senator Vern Smith and others invited a group in to see what they were doing. And we found out that the upstate Chamber of Commerce groups were just about as strong as the State Department of Commerce. And they didn't sit around and wait. They set agendas and wanted to make a difference. And so what we did is came back, even in the area I'm from, I came from a county, Williamsburg, that was about 18% unemployed. When I got in the Senate, it was 16, 18%. It went as high as 19%. And you got to seize those agendas to make a difference, but you got to build those contacts to make a change. And you got to make sure there's a thing called skilled labor and unskilled labor that you have to deal with. And so what we did is from that about 16, 18%, when we left the Senate, it was 7.8%. We had totally flipped the whole deal, but we had to work at it. And then I decided, having been to the upper part of the state, knowing about Central Alliance, right here in Columbia area, this region, we started a group called the Northeastern Strategic Alliance. I was chairman of that group the second year it was formed, and I was chair of that group for about 13, 14 years. And matter of fact, the last 10 years, I came out a year ago and we decided to run for governor. I didn't think it would be fair to the other alliances for somebody to be chair of an executive committee. So I came out, but in the last decade, I would say that we put together some 19,000 jobs down there in that area. The core group was Oree, Florence County, where they were the hubs, and then you had Georgetown and other areas that surrounded Darlington and Chesterfield and other parts in that area, Marion County, and we started seeing all that double-digit unemployment coming down. But what we did is we organized for the future. So we ended up seeing right at 19,000 new jobs came in that area the last decade, far more than that, if we go back to when we started. But it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 350, I'd say $350 billion came into that small area. When you're dealing with groups like Honda and Metglass and Hitachi and Nanya and so many other industries, you're working closely with them, which meant we had to do a lot of what Carroll Campbell and others did. You couldn't wait here to see companies in Tokyo and Osaka and all the places around the country, around the world come in, but even with these North American offices, you had to go visit these groups to let them know that you really want them to come in. And so what we did, we were able to convince a lot of companies to come into this state. And of course, like I said earlier, one of my areas that I chaired a budget for 10 years, 12 years, was Department of Commerce. We had about 3 or 4 different commerce directors. Matter of fact, we were in Tokyo with, we went in, the NISA group, Nikki Haley as governor of this state came in with commerce, and we met with industry in Tokyo and trying to recruit to get them to come into South Carolina. And we had success, but it all goes way back to many governors many moons ago, Dick Riley and Carroll Campbell and many others. And it continued with Carroll Campbell and Beasley and all the different governors. They've kept it active and kept it alive, and that's a good thing. And so what I'm sharing with you today is more a little bit about myself, what I look at, but let me share a couple of other things. This thing about job killing regulations got to go, impact fees. I will tell you this, that in the state, we in a work-free state. The only dealings I've ever had with unions, I've had 2, that I had to work the local community and employees, and I had to work with different industrial local people to stop that unionization from occurring where we were. And one we had to go back and defeat, it was over in Florence County. The one that was in Williamsburg, we killed it pretty much right up front. But these leaders of these industries, whether it be Toyota or whether it be a Bridgestone, Firestone, if you go into Tokyo, that's the first thing they'll ask you to do, is make sure that we stop using our strengths to be union free. We want the state to be union free. That's why we're here. That's why we located here. They do look at tort reform. They look at workman's compensation reform. And those are a lot of the issues that we've dealt with over the years. But I will tell you this, that South Carolina is doing a great job with Bobby Hitt as Secretary of Commerce in a great way. And I will tell you that even though Nikki Haley is no longer governor, but a lot of projects she worked on in there, we're starting to see them come about. And I will tell you that Henry's done a good job as governor of this state dealing with economic development. I will tell it just the way it is and the way you see it, but I will tell you this too, that Joyce Giroux, it's good to see you. I know Jim was here earlier. Hope, good to see you as well. But we have a state that nowhere would we want to be. I believe if Donald Trump knew a little bit more about South Carolina, he'd be wanting to move to South Carolina. He'd probably be wanting to buy some property. He might be doing it now. But I will tell you this, that no greater place. We're going to be down with the State Chamber of Commerce tomorrow. We'll speak with them tomorrow. And we got some things we want to share economically with them. But I will just tell you, beside the audits and reform, DOT, I asked for a list not long ago. We're going to get the list. But I wanted to see a list of all the new projects that were going on in the state. I've yet to get that list. And I asked a commissioner, a former commissioner, and another commissioner. But we'll get it. But the thing is, we need to understand the needs of this state, but we need to know exactly what kind of new projects are going on and what kind of restoration projects are going on in this state too. We got to make sure we're playing with a level deck for everybody to make it fair that all parts of this state will benefit, especially with this gas tax that has gone in with some of these others that are coming about. We just got to make sure that the plan is a plan that will protect all areas of this state. I will say this other thing about teaching. My wife was a teacher for 32, 33 years. She'd come home and she'd talk to me every night. If I put my head on that pillow early or late, she'd come in there and explain to me about what it meant to be a teacher and the responsibilities, and she took her work very serious. And I can tell you the biggest issue she told me is, she said, you know, if we'll just let our teachers teach instead of do all this testing all the time, that's all they do is test. We got to have tests. We got to look at the balance of education. But we got to make sure too is whenever a student comes even out of high school and goes to an industry, they got to have enough science skill and math skill that they can go in and not just fill out that application, but have the qualifications that an industrial that they're looking for. So I would not say that if I didn't know it firsthand, even from my wife and other teachers. Rural development, there's a closing fund that's generally between $25, $28 million a year. They'll use those funds to help bring industry in that's teetering. I remember when Torrey came in up in Spartanburg, that was a big industry that South Carolina wanted to get. It was some 500 jobs, and it was billions of dollars in investment up in Spartanburg. We were trying to get them in the lower part of the state, but we didn't have the workforce to do it. Now, SC Ready is one of the best training groups anyway in this country. We know that, but we've got to keep it funded and keep it strong. And we've got to have an enduring program that won't just start, it's got to continue. But I will tell you that what I found with Torrey is Tokyo Rayon is basically where the name came from with Torrey. And when they announced it up in Spartanburg, I remember we went to meet with those people back in Tokyo. It was like in 2006, a good while back. But when we did that, we realized very quickly that they were open to locating somewhere in this country. But the only way you can get these new industries located is you got to go see them. You got to spend time with them. And then you got to have local environmental, but a local economic teams of people together, working together. You can't have an environmental group here and an economic development team way over there across the aisle. You got to have people working together. And so what I share with you is that I'm of the opinion, even when Torrey came, many others that have expanded. When Honda was doing a lot of closing when the economy got rough, they laid a few employees off in Florence, over in Timmonsville, but as soon as the economic hardship was over, they put those employees right back to work. But they remembered visits by our local state delegation that would go in and meet with these groups. And whether you're dealing with Taipei, Taiwan, or Shanghai with some of the solar companies, or all the different opportunities that are out there, I can tell you that South Carolina is back on top. It was on top at one time. We lost that edge, but this state is back on top. It's taken a number of years, but a lot of the local industrialists and economic leaders have worked triple overtime to make a difference in bringing the opportunity back. So it's no different. It's the same way of how we arrived, but we've got to make sure that we go keep the proper resources and funding dealing directly with economic development. Only one or two other things very quickly. Tourism has been very good for this state. You remember back in the early 2000s when the economy was hardcore, and Charleston saw it, and Beaufort saw it, and Hilton Head, and Myrtle Beach, all saw it here in Columbia, saw it in Greenville. But we had to come with a 2-to-1 destination opportunity where if the local communities would put in $1, the state would match them dollar for dollar with that money. And it worked. And what happened is about 35% of the restaurants on the coastal areas closed because they didn't have the customers. People were not spending that money and they were not coming and staying on the coast. And then very quickly with the marketing and advertising and the strength that was displayed between the state and local governments, it all changed. It came back in a big way. And so what we saw, a lot of condominiums that were built for $1.2 million to $1.5 million, you could have gone down and bought them for probably $600,000-800,000. Then the values came back once the economy came back. But if you remember, you could buy a house in Charleston, South Carolina, and Andy, I would think that probably in 4 years' time, it doubled in value. And then that went away because of some of the hardship, but it's almost back in the same posture today. And so that's a good thing. Tourism, we got to keep investing because the jobs and capital investment, that's the good. So when you think about pro-business, work-free state, pro-life, pro-family, Second Amendment, all of it, we are a hunting and fishing destination all over this country. People love coming in and spending money in South Carolina. And it makes a big difference. But I'll just close with this. Be happy you live in South Carolina. No place like South Carolina. Thank you for letting us be here today with you.